Good afternoon. Welcome to the free Zoom webinar arranged by Lembaga Bahasa Internasional, FIB UI. The topic in this session is integrating skills in the assessment of L2 learner language. I am Mitya Alinda, English teacher and test coordinator of several programs in the foreign language program of LBE. Our presenter today is Santi Lestari. Currently, she is pursuing her PhD in Lancaster University in the UK. However, she had been active in teaching and teacher training in Universitas Indonesia. Her interests and research are in testing and assessment, teaching and assessing academic writing, and continuing professional development for teachers. We encourage you to ask questions that Santi will address after her presentation. Please use the Q&A box to type in your questions. You can communicate with other participants in the chat box, but for the Q&A, please use the Q&A box. All right, let's start the presentation now. Please, Santi, I give you the floor.
All right, thank you, Ibu Meti, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. I hope you're all safe and healthy. And I think I should start sharing my screen. Okay, all right. All right, okay. So today, I'll be sharing about a topic so close to my heart. It's something that I've been studying for the past few years, integrating skills in language assessment. So essentially, I'll be talking about integrated tasks, which I'm sure many of you have probably heard about. Perhaps some of you have taken a test that has integrated tasks in there, or perhaps some of you have even used integrated tasks in your teaching context. For those of you who are quite new to the topic, you've probably haven't heard about it before, don't worry, because I'll start from the very basic, really. And for those of you who have had experience in integrated tasks, I hope you will still find the session useful. So here is the plan of my talk. So I'll begin by discussing the definition, the strengths or advantages of integrated tasks and the different forms. And then I'll move on to discussing the construct that this task type can target. And I'll talk a bit about the marking or scoring procedures. And then we'll look at two examples, which hopefully will clarify the points that I'll be talking about in points 1 and 2. And although the two examples are in the English language, I hope those of you who are teaching other languages will still find the examples useful. And finally, I'll discuss a common pitfalls associated with integrated tasks so that we all can avoid these pitfalls. Language one skill at a time. So we assess like listening, and then we assess reading, we assess writing, speaking quite separately. Perhaps you have for example, a summative test or a semester test where you evaluate all these 4 skills. But I think most of the time we still have like separate sections, like listening section, reading section, writing section, and then speaking section. So I think our practice is still very much, evaluating individual skills one at a time. So therefore, today I'd like to introduce this task type, integrated tasks, which hopefully, it's hopefully a task that you'd like to incorporate into your practice. So I'm not saying that this task should, replace our current practice, like, is assessing one skill at a time. I'm not trying to demonize the current practice. What I'm trying to do is to offer you an addition that you might want to incorporate into your practice. So integrated tasks, I think by now you can sort of guess like what kind of tasks, and indeed I have the definition here. Essentially, integrated tasks are tasks that involve more than one language skill. So it can be, for example, reading and writing, listening and speaking, or perhaps you can even have more than two skills, like reading, listening, writing, or reading, listening, speaking, okay? So generally, we have one or more source texts, usually. It can be in the form of reading or listening passages. And then we have a target modality in the form of speaking or writing. So I'll be using these two terms quite a lot in the remainder of my presentation: source texts and target modality. So source texts are basically the texts that provide information to the learners, and target modality is the product that we will evaluate or assess in the end, okay? Right, so if you see this definition, it looks very, very simple and is indeed very open to multiple interpretations. That's why I'd like to also share with you 3 requirements for a task to qualify as an integrated task. These requirements were proposed by Nok and Sita Jalabur, 2013. Let's take a look. Okay, so these requirements were originally for integrated writing tasks, but I'm sure they're also relevant to other types of integrated tasks. So the first requirement is that the source texts should be language rich, okay? So the source texts should not be just visual stimuli. For example, maps or charts or graphs or pictures, or perhaps a table with statistic in there. So if you've got a task with that kind of visual stimuli, which might have some language in there, but it's mainly visual, that kind of task cannot be considered an integrated task because it doesn't meet the first requirement. And okay. The second requirement is that the written or spoken product needs to make use of the information from the source texts. In other words, the learners or students need to draw information from the source texts, okay? So yes, they can use ideas, their own ideas, but then more importantly, they really have to draw information or ideas from the source texts, okay? And finally, the third requirement is that the language used in the source texts needs to be linguistically modified before being used in the target modality, in speaking or in writing. By linguistic modification here, I'm talking about, paraphrasing, for example, or summarizing or quoting properly, of course, okay? Right. So now let's take a look at the rationales, like why? Why should we include integrated tasks in our teaching? Like, what's so good about it, really? So the first, and I think the most important advantage is related to enhanced authenticity. So integrated tasks are believed to have better authenticity than independent tasks, tasks that only assess one skill at a time that I talked about earlier, okay? Because you see, in real life communication, generally, we use more than one skill together, right? So for example, when we speak, we listen to our interlocutor and then we respond to the interlocutor. So we use like two skills, like listening and speaking. Or even when you are delivering a presentation, like what I'm currently doing, right? It probably looks like, I'm just using one skill. But essentially, I'm talking about something based on what I've read. So it's based on reading, and also it's based on perhaps discussions with my colleagues. So again, most of the time when we communicate in real life, we use two or more skills together. Similarly, when we write, especially, for example, in an academic context, we don't write based on what we think only. Again, generally, but I think most of the time we have to write based on what other people have said or have written about earlier, right? So having two or more skills in one task will improve the task authenticity. Right, another advantage is related to fairness. So I'd like you to read this quote from Weigel 2004. Please take some time to read it. Right, again, originally this quote was for integrated writing tasks, but again, I'm very sure that this is also absolutely relevant to other types of integrated tasks. So again, I think the key words here are putting our learners on a more equal footing. So it's a fairer task. So I think to understand this better, let's compare an integrated task with an independent task. Let's take an example of writing. Imagine like we are all teachers and we design an essay task for our students. And then we give our students a topic or a prompt and ask them to write an essay based on that prompt, or they have to write an essay on that particular topic. Then some of our students might be advantaged because perhaps they happen to read about the topic the day before the test, so that they have more information to write about, and probably then they require less time to plan their essay. They will be less anxious because they will be more confident. While some other students might be disadvantaged because they don't have enough background knowledge about the topic, and therefore they might feel anxious because again, they've got no idea or maybe limited understanding of the topic, and therefore it might take them more time to plan, and they have less time to actually write the essay again. So we see it's not fair because some people are at a better position than others. So let's compare that kind of task with an integrated task where we have the same prompt, we have the same topic, but in addition to the prompt, we also provide our learners with source texts, okay? So everybody will have the same access to information, right? So they will have the same reading passages, and they will have like some sort of information that they can transfer to their writing. So again, it's favor and it's important. And in the end, it will also reduce their test anxiety. Okay, so those are, I think, the two most important advantages, but we've got sort of like less direct advantages as well. And the first one is in relation to formative assessment. Many integrated tasks that we know are probably used in large-scale standardized tests, but actually the nature of integrated tasks is, it lends itself very, very nicely to formative assessment. So if you're a teacher at a school or a language school, it's totally suitable to your context. So you can definitely use integrated tasks in your teaching context. And additionally, in light of the current climate where assessment is mostly done online and we are so concerned about cheating, I think having integrated tasks will help reduce or mitigate cheating. Well, again, we can't possibly eliminate all possibilities of cheating, but then we can sort of like try to reduce that possibility, because we provide our learners with texts. So hopefully then, they will need to base their answer on the texts that we provide. So for example, again, we provide them with the topic and then texts. Without texts, perhaps they can Google the topic, they can, take an essay from the internet and submit it to you, or perhaps they can assemble an essay from, a number of different texts. They put together like sentences from different texts and then submit to you. And of course, this is something that we all want to avoid, right? So I think integrated tasks can be a good alternative in the current climate. So let me summarize so far. So far we've looked at the definition, the advantages, and we'll move on to the different forms. I personally, I'd like to see integrated tasks as an umbrella term because it comes in different forms, really. So it sort of like subsumes a number of different forms. So these are some of the integrated tasks that I'm familiar with. We can have a summary task, an oral summary, or a written summary task. We can have reading into writing. Some people perhaps call it reading to write, listening into writing, or listening to write, reading, listening, writing, or reading, listening, speaking. So again, like you've got like a number of options that you can choose from, depending on your context and depending on the language skills that you teach. Right, so by now, I hope you've started considering integrating integrated tasks into your teaching context. And let's now take a look at what kind of things you need to consider when you want to design or develop an integrated task. So first of all, define your target construct. This is not only for integrated tasks. In fact, this is true for all kinds of measurement instruments. Having a clearly defined construct is paramount, because the construct, okay, by construct, I mean what you want to measure exactly. So it's something that you want to target using your measurement instrument. And in this case, we're talking about integrated tasks. So the construct will really determine what we need to do next. So let's take a look. So the construct will determine what form of integrated task we will have, or perhaps what skills we want to involve, and also how many or what kind of texts we will use as the source texts, and also what and how to score, for example, okay? Right, let's take a look at the possible uses of integrated tasks. Okay, the first one, you can use integrated tasks as a measure of receptive skills, listening and or reading. For example, if you use a summary task, Okay, of course, the product that you will see is a written or an oral summary, but this written or oral summary can serve as evidence of your learners' listening or reading comprehension. So like the summary is actually a proxy of their performance in listening and or reading. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is actually as a measure of productive skills, writing or speaking, okay? You can focus more on the target modality. And a third possibility, this is a possibility, or this is the use of integrated tasks that I strongly advocate. I mean, it's integrated tasks. I think we really need to maximize the affordances. So personally, I like to encourage you to use integrated tasks as a measure of receptive, productive skills, as well as the interaction between the two skills. So if we can like target all these different things, why not? Why should we just focus on one particular skill? And indeed, like the interaction is very, very important, right? It's not just whether you want to focus on receptive or productive skills. And if you happen to teach academic writing, you can also target some of the areas related to academic literacy. We'll look at the example later, okay? Right, now, after you define the construct, then you design the task, you select the source texts. The next thing is to think about the scoring. Right, it looks very simple, but essentially I'd like to emphasize that the construct and the scoring should correspond to each other. In other words, the scoring should reflect the construct, okay? Or should be based on the construct. For example, if you use an integrated task as a measure of reading or reading comprehension, for example, the first use that I talked about earlier, then perhaps in the scoring, you don't want to, or you shouldn't, I think you shouldn't focus too much on grammar, vocabulary, spelling, punctuation, because your construct is on reading rather than writing, right? So you shouldn't perhaps penalize your students when they make spelling mistakes, okay? Conversely, if you use the third use that I talked about earlier, if you want to measure both, let's say, reading and writing and the interaction between the two skills, then it's very, very important also to include both or even the three areas in the scoring system. So the scoring system shouldn't just focus on writing, because again, you want to target the reading construct as well, okay? And again, we'll take a look at an example of that later. Okay, so again, other things that we all need to consider with regards to marking. First of all, we mark the product, and most of the time we use rating scales, or in American English, they call them rubrics. Usually we have to choose either holistic or analytic rubrics or rating scales, although actually there are other choices, but I think these two are the most common. And if you're using this task for your classroom-based assessment, I really encourage that you use the analytic rating skills, because analytic rating skills enable you to provide richer feedback to your students, and your students will be able to learn what they've done well and what areas they have to work on more. And if you happen to have like a number of parallel classes, so there are different teachers teaching the same sort of, or teaching using the same syllabus, then it's important to have rated training and standardization or norming as well. just to make sure that everybody, every teacher has the same understanding of the rating scales and the rating scale descriptors. And if you want to use it with your students and you want to incorporate self and peer assessment, be sure to also teach your students how to use the rating scales. Right, so now we've come to the most anticipated part, I'm sure. We'll look at 2 reading into writing tasks. I deliberately chose 2 reading into writing tasks. You might wonder why not like another task type. Well, my intention is to show you that one form can be used to target different proficiency levels and also different sort of like different type or different genre, if you like. Okay, let's take a look at the first one. It's a reading into writing task developed by Gebril and Plakans. It was developed for EFL learners in the UAE. It's quite long, so bear with me. So this one is the first part. This is the instructions. Read the question below and then read the 2 passages to get more information about the topic. Write an essay on the topic, giving your opinion in response to the question. Typically, an effective response will contain a minimum of 300 words. You see here, there will be a question and there will be 2 source passages, and this is the genre essay, and this is the minimum length. And here you can see learners will also know like the areas of assessment, ideas, the readings, how the readings support the argument, the organization of the essay, the vocabulary used, the grammar, spelling, and punctuation. And here is the question. Some people believe that global warming is damaging our planet. Others believe that global warming is not a serious problem. Which point of view do you agree with and why? Give reasons and support your writing with examples. So you see here, it's like a typical essay question, right? The only difference is that in this task, learners are also provided with 2 source texts, which we'll see in a moment. Again, okay, the genre here we can see it's an essay, it's an argumentative essay. And here on this side, there is also important information regarding what learners can do or can't do, things related to the fact that they can go back to the passages while writing, the fact that they can borrow ideas and examples from the text, but they should mention the author's name, and they can quote, but they have to quote properly. And I can't really show you the 2 reading passages because they are quite dense. Yeah, not very long, but quite dense. I think I'll just show you the titles. So reading 1, the title is Scientists Say Global Warming is Undeniable. And reading 2, Myth of Global Warming. So you see, it's the same topic, but each passage addresses a different point of view. Okay, and this is the question again. Right, now let's take a look at the rating scales. The rating scale. Well, again, due to the density of the words in the rating scale, I can't show you the whole rating scale. But if you're interested, you can check this book. But I'll just show you the criteria. So it's an analytic rating scale or an analytic rubric with 5 criteria. Here are the criteria: source use, organization, development of ideas, language use, and authorial voice. And you might wonder, like, some of them are in purple. Yeah, I put them in purple deliberately. So these purple criteria are criteria that sort of operationalize or that address both reading and writing. The black ones are primarily about writing, right? Organization of the text or the language use of the text. But the other 3 are a combination of reading and writing. let me show you part of the rating scale, part of the descriptors. So let's start with the source use. Band 5 is the highest band, okay? So it starts with 1, which is the lowest band, and 5 is the highest band. And you can take a look here. Right. Okay, so you see, I would like you to pay attention to this one, accuracy of source text content. So accuracy, so it's important that students are able to present the text or the information from the text accurately. Okay, so again, as I said earlier, this criterion deals with both reading and writing. Okay, so it's about the accuracy of source text representation. And if we compare this descriptor at band 5 with descriptors at band 1, okay, so it's got complete misrepresentation of source information. Yeah, so that's a very, very poor performance. And that shows that the learners do not comprehend the source texts fully. Right, and development of ideas, I'll just show you quickly. Okay, again, full development of ideas using different types of details provided by the student and also provided by the source texts. Okay, right, so I guess now you know that, okay, this task is at quite a high proficiency level, which is right. And you might wonder, like, what about my students? My students aren't at that level. Okay, that's why I mentioned earlier, I also have another example, which I'll show you in a bit. Okay, so this second example is for learners at a lower level. It's at B2 of the Common European Framework of Reference, if you are familiar, the CEFR. So it's at B2 level. So it's an integrated reading into writing task taken from the ISC test. It's Integrated Skills in English by Trinity College London. It's an exam board based in London. So this task has got 4 source texts, unlike the previous one, which has 2 source texts. So here you see, I'll just tell you the topic. The topic is about exercise or getting fit. Text A is about swimming. Text B is about going to the gym. Text C is about walking, like the benefits of walking. And text 4, or it's text D here, presents a bit of statistics, and basically it's about the trend of physical activity. Okay, and here is the question. Write an article, 100 to 130 words, for a school or college magazine saying what you think is the best way to get fit. So you see, this is the genre. And learners have to use information presented in the 4 texts. And they have to address all these subtasks, okay? And again, like, do not copy from the text. Use your own words as far as possible. All right, so now let's take a look at the rating scale again. Okay, so this rating scale has got 4 criteria, and only one of them is in purple, reading for writing. The other 3 are mainly about the writing project, but the first one is about reading and writing. And let's take a look at the descriptors. So this reading for writing criterion has got 5 sub-criteria. I wonder if you can read these sub-criteria. Again, I've got the link here. So if you're interested, you can just go to the link and you can find this kind of task at 4 different levels, if I'm not mistaken. So at different levels of the CFR, and you can find more sample tasks. You can also find different rating scales for different levels. So they have different rating scales for different levels of the test. Okay, right. This is at level 4. Again, the highest level for this task, and this is at level 1, which is the lowest. Okay, right. So again, reading for writing, basically it subsumes areas like understanding of the reading or selection of relevant materials. It also deals with paraphrasing, summarizing, etc. Okay, right. So hopefully after seeing the 2 examples, you have a better understanding of integrated tasks. Okay, right. So now, 5 common pitfalls that we should avoid. Pitfall number 1, poorly defined construct. I think it's true for all types of measurement instruments. Poorly defined construct is something that we really, really want to avoid. And it's something that we need to make sure from the very beginning that we have a clear construct. And the second one is poor selection of source texts. It might be too difficult or too long or too short, or the content or the organization of the text doesn't lend itself to be used in integrated tasks. Okay, perhaps, right? So perhaps if you've got like a newly designed task, it's really important to pilot it with your students and see if the source texts can actually function. Okay, if not, then perhaps you need to revise that. Pitfall number 3, unclear instructions. Again, this might be a new task type, so you have to be sure that you've got all the important informations in the task. Number 4, unclear scoring criteria or procedures. Okay, this is important for you as the teacher and also for the students or for your colleagues as well if you've got like parallel classes. And pitfall number 5, learners' unfamiliarity with the task. So if you plan to use this kind of task as an like end of semester, in a end of semester test or as a summative test, a part of the summative test, then it's important, it's really, really important to introduce this task type to your learners so that they won't be surprised. They should have some familiarity before they are tested using this task type. So please be sure that you teach them or you introduce them and that they've got some practice before they are being tested using this task type. Okay, I think that's all. Okay, my presentation, and again, we'll look at some of the questions that you have sent us. Let's see.
All right, thank you, Santi.
Yes.
I think that was quite informative. There are quite a number of questions that we have here. Let me, I think there are some questions related to what language proficiency and age levels are appropriate for assessing with integrated skills concept. Is it applicable for all age levels or proficiency levels?
Right, okay, thank you for the question. First of all, regarding the proficiency level, I think it's suitable for all different proficiency levels. I've seen an integrated task for A2 level of the CFR, so it's like lower than B1 that I showed you earlier, lower than the second example that I showed you. So A2 is quite low actually, and that's possible. I think it really depends on the target construct and also the selection of source texts. So of course you want to be sure that the source texts will facilitate your learners to perform their writing skills or speaking skills. So the source texts should facilitate, they shouldn't hinder the performance of the writing or speaking skills. I think that's the most important thing. As for the age level, yeah, I think what I've seen so far, I think the lowest is probably for teenagers. That's possible. Unfortunately, I haven't seen an example for, you know, like children, for example, but I think it's possible. It's very possible. Again, it really depends on the selection of the source materials and the task. So I think a good way to start is try to look at your current task, let's say speaking or writing task. Look at the existing task that you have and think about the possible ways of sort of modifying that into an integrated task, okay? And see if that's possible. And again, my recommendation is that if you want to use this task the first time, don't use it as a summative, as part of the summative task. So perhaps use it as a formative task and see whether your learners can respond to the task well or not. And if the first time they can't really respond to the task, perhaps it's not because of the task type, it's because it's the first time, it's because they're not familiar with it, okay? So yeah, so try a couple of times with your learners as part of your ongoing assessment before using it in your summative assessment.
Right. Yes, I believe that that also is a response to a question that asked, are there any tips and tricks on how to assess students' daily performance on online learning regarding especially the situation that we are in now, that we have to, our classes are online, but I think this is basically also is related to that as you said, that for integrated tasks, we have to start first, and we ourselves have to know whether our students can respond to the task or not. So are there any tips and tricks or strategies, probably tips and tricks that
Right.
you might have?
I think, of course, I mean, since I'm sort of, you know, encouraging you to use integrated tasks, so maybe you can start with that. As I said earlier, it lends itself very nicely to online environment. So perhaps you can start with one text. You can start with a summary task, for example. So you provide your students with one reading passage and ask them to write a summary of that. It really depends on your learners' proficiency level and the age level as well. So you can start with a summary task, make it low stakes. So perhaps the first time you use it, don't give a grade, you know, give feedback so that, you know, they feel more sort of less intimidated with this new task type. So yeah, start with a summary task with one source text. Then you can then increase the number of texts after that. So provide them with 2 texts and then ask them to synthesize or to write a response. For example, maybe like 2 texts presenting the same topic from different points of view, and then ask them to choose which point of view they agree with, something like that. Or perhaps for speaking, you can also provide a short listening text, perhaps, or even a reading text, and ask them to submit an oral summary to you. I think that will work very well.
All right. I think this one is an interesting point as well. Which one is preferable, real authentic text or authentic text with modification for
Right.
integrated tasks?
Okay, thank you. Um, right, I think that's a very important question. Yeah, I think it's not limited just to integrated tasks. I think that question is also relevant to other types of tasks. First of all, it depends on the level, the proficiency level that you're targeting. I think it's easier to use authentic texts for like higher proficiency levels, but I know it's very, very difficult to find authentic texts for lower proficiency levels. It might not be possible. In that case, then you can adapt materials. So you can find a text which is quite easy and then adapt it, make it suitable to the level that you're targeting. I think that's a strategy, and that strategy is relevant to other types of tasks as well. So I think there is no harm in using adapted materials. Okay, it's important to be sure that the materials or the source texts will, as I said earlier, will facilitate your learners to perform to the best of their ability in the productive skill, rather than focusing on using authentic materials. I think you can use both authentic and adapted materials. And in fact, the first example that I showed you earlier, the global warming essay, the two texts are actually adapted texts. They are not authentic, but they've been adapted from authentic sources. I hope I answered that question.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
There are some questions here regarding the assessment rubric, I believe.
Yes.
That I think probably some people are still having issues on the assessment rubric. There's a question, do we have to separate rubrics for the assessment of integrated tasks? How do we define the construct for each or combine them? Or maybe a different question, but with a different wording. Do you have an example of assessment rubric which shows the measurement of the interaction between skills?
Okay, yeah.
The rubric,
So
yeah.
first, I think the first question, if I understand the question correctly, do we need to separate? Yeah, do we need to separate the skills? Well, I think, okay, first of all, we've got the holistic rating scale and analytic. If you use the holistic one, then it's got one score at the end. So we assign one score to the performance. So in that sense, then all are integrated. Then another option, if you use the analytic rating scales, then you will have like multiple, usually 4 or 5 criteria. As I showed you earlier, some criteria, I can say, are primarily writing related, while some other criteria are both. Actually, if you look at the descriptors, the purple criteria actually address both the reading and writing at the same time. For example, like the one that I mentioned earlier, accuracy of source text representation, something like that. So it actually encompasses both reading and writing, right? Because if the essay contains accurate representation of source text material, then we can draw conclusion that the learners could comprehend the text, okay? So that accuracy of representation is a proxy of reading comprehension. And on the other hand, a failure to accurately present information is a proxy of failure in reading comprehension, or lack, I would say, limited reading comprehension, for example. So yeah, I think you can integrate the two. But commonly, from what I've seen so far with analytic rating scales, commonly they've got some criteria which are primarily writing, like organization and language usually, and then some other criteria are more like combination, if you like. Yeah. Well, yes, it's not easy, to be honest with you, to construct a good rating scale. So my recommendation is for you to collect samples, like existing samples. I've shown you two, and if you go to Trinity College London website, you can find more samples of rating scales. They've got the ISC reading and writing, and also ISC speaking, ISC listening and speaking. So you can download all the rating scales and study them. And you can also find others, like the TOEFL IPT also has a number of integrated tasks, both the speaking and the writing integrated tasks. So you can also download the rating scales or the rubrics and study those examples and see which one you think you can sort of adapt. Perhaps it really depends on your teaching context, but I think starting from looking at some examples is important. And also you have to make it relevant to the construct that you're targeting, as I said earlier. Okay.
All right. Another question regarding the issue of fairness, or I think also this is related to cheating as well. Yeah. The question is, as you agree with Weigel's statements on fairness in assessment, that students or test takers should have the same samadha, it appears to cause another problem. For example, copying and pasting from the provided reading text to their writing skills. How to address the copy and paste problem? And
yes, okay.
generally, yes, there are other questions also related to cheating.
Okay, sorry, let me just go. Yeah, oops. I don't know why I can't go back. Okay, yeah, thank you for that question. That's a real concern. And to be very honest with you, that's an area that raters or teachers find it hard to sort of decide during marking, because sometimes you see like, okay, it's good, actually, it's a good piece of writing, but then a lot of lifting from the source text. And how to treat that kind of, should I penalize that kind of writing or not? Because overall it's actually good, but it's a lot of like lifting, as I said. So if you want to, I mean, if that's a construct that you want to target, for example, you're teaching academic writing, so of course you want to make your students aware of, you know, practices in academic writing, like proper quotation or paraphrasing. Then if that's a really important thing that you want to target, then you should have that in your rating scales, and you should make it clear to your students in the instructions of your task. So if you take a look at this IC, this is the IC rating scale at band 4. I wonder if you can see this one at the very bottom here. Band 4, the highest band, it's got excellent paraphrasing and summarizing skills of short pieces of information demonstrated. Okay, so it's not a lot of lifting. It's like information is taken from the source texts, but the information is also paraphrased or summarized, for example. Okay, while at level 1, let's see if I can show you. Okay, level 1, poor paraphrasing or summarizing skills of short pieces of information demonstrated, heavy lifting, and many disconnected ideas. So yeah, I mean, if as long as you're clear that this is something that your students shouldn't do, it's fair to penalize them because you've told them that you can't just copy and paste. You should paraphrase, or you should use your own wording. And okay, let's take a look at another example. Okay, this one again. Yeah, this one is the earlier example, the first example. It says here the lowest band, no source use. So the text or the essay is primarily based on the learner's own ideas, and then very problematic textual borrowing. Textual borrowing is like, the practices of using information from the source text. Very problematic here is related to something like verbatim use without giving credits to authors or complete misrepresentation of source information. Yeah, indeed, it's an area that is very important, and you have to include it in the instructions as well as in the rating scale. So thank you so much for raising that question. Okay, I'll stop sharing again. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Santi. I think, yes, we're almost out of time. I think there are many questions actually that we are not able to address because a lot of people, I think, are very interested in this topic. And I believe that hopefully the participants will be able to watch this recording of this webinar, and also will be able to search more of the sources that you have mentioned. Thank you, Santi. Because we're almost out of time, I think it is a great pleasure for us to have Santi as the speaker for this webinar. Thank you so much, Santi.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
All right, everyone, participants, before we go, please give your response to the poll that you can see on your screen for your comments on this webinar. And based on the previous questions as well, I repeat the information that the e-certificate will be sent to your email, and the recording of the webinars can be accessed in the LBE website, or there's also a YouTube channel that that we will post the recording of the webinars. So before you go, please give your response to the poll. And also, as a parting note, after you have given your response to the poll, LBE FEBUE has some services on testing. And for further information for those tests, you can visit our website. All right. Once again, thank you very much, Santi, for your very informative and quite thought-provoking, I think, to a lot of our attendees. And hopefully you will be able to have another session with us
Thank you.
in this topic of assessment.
Yes. Thank you everyone for joining us.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone. Good afternoon.
Yes. Bye.
Goodbye.